Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for being here for our weekly class with Geshe. I just want to reminds to all of you that in the WhatsApp, in my little phone, so every week I put a link for the YouTube recording. And if someone have a problem and he cannot be in the WhatsApp group, so please write me down and I will join you to my email so you can get all the material for the course and the link for the YouTube. Hi, Geshe.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Thanks for being here.
I know you're not that well. I saw it on the BBC.
I saw it. Terrible. I didn't know if to send you some picture or not, so
I saw some, yeah, online. I found a lot online. I mean, on the BBC, it talked about it a lot, and a lot of pictures. Yeah. What a sad day. Anyway.
Yeah. So you're on co-host now, so you can start.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So let's start right away with our motivation. No, not with our motivation, but watching the breath first of all. Just being in the present. And then visualize in the space in front of you. An emanation or a manifestation of all the enlightened qualities we ourselves can attain, arising in the form of Buddha Shakyamuni. Who's the same nature as your Lama or your Lamas. inseparable from all the great masters. With a radiant body made of light. Extremely kind. And at the same time, wise face. Wearing the saffron robes of a fully ordained monk. Seated in a lotus, the full lotus position. And ready at any time to guide us on the path to enlightenment. But to remember why we're doing this, why we're here. Think that you're surrounded by all sentient beings. Without a single being missing. They all surround us. With those who we don't like, we avoid, we have a hard time with, right in front of us. And then let's remember that our differences are outweighed by what we all have in common. Not wanting to suffer, but to feel satisfied. And having a mind that from the point of view of its nature is completely pure. Just as the mind of a Buddha. And then based on that understanding, generate a deep sense of closeness. Of acceptance and care. In the form of affectionate love. Focusing on each and every sentient being. Including those right in front of us. And then remembering that despite the pure nature of our minds, we are afflicted by the adventitious misperception, anger, and so forth, leading to endless suffering. And so aware of that, let's generate great compassion. A mind that wholeheartedly wishes for all sentient beings to be free from suffering and all the causes that give rise to suffering. Not just that, a mind that wishes to be able to help sentient beings to remove their suffering and its causes. And that mind then grows stronger, turning into a type of inner strength, courage, and joy, determined to do whatever is necessary and however long it takes to help sentient beings overcome the suffering and its causes and discover their true nature. And to be able to effectively do that, let's generate bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment that aspires for the sake of each and every sentient being, even those right in front of us, even for their sake, to become a fully enlightened Buddha. No matter the hardship, no matter the time it may take to reach such a state. And then while we recite the prayer, let's remember what His Holiness taught about refuge and bodhicitta. The first two lines indicate causal refuge, and the last two lines indicate resultant refuge. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Okay. So I just talked about something His Holiness talked about yesterday and today as well again. I think, no, yesterday, the day before yesterday, I forget, but definitely today. I don't know whether you were there, but he talked about the first two lines, taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha. That refers to the causal refuge. We entrust ourselves, we learn from an outside source, if you like. And then the last two lines, generating bodhicitta for the benefit of all sentient beings, well, that points towards resultant refuge, our own enlightenment. Okay, anyway, so let's start. Start with the Lamrim. Okay. All right. Can you see the outlines? Yep, good. All right, it's just the topic we need, how the afflictions develop. And as I said before, it's very helpful, not just helpful, very important to relate everything we learn here back to, well, everything we learn about the Lamrim to what we're studying about emptiness and so forth. And of course, relating emptiness all the way back to the Lamrim and never see them separate. In fact, the Lamrim is so important that whatever you study, take some time to check how does it fit into the Lamrim. And I mean, in a way, everything connects to everything. And it's not difficult really to figure out how these two connect. So now in particular with regard to emptiness, something as Holmes stresses all the time, those two, bodhicitta, emptiness, kind of simplifying it to such a degree that it seems so overwhelming, Buddhist practice. But if we know how to summarize it, it makes it much more accessible. But anyway, what does the Lamrim tell us here in connection to the teachings on suffering, on the teachings of the path that is common to a person of middling capacity? Well, it talks about suffering, but in particular also about the causes of suffering, because that's what we're mainly interested in. Without knowing that there are causes, or without there being any causes, we wouldn't be able to remove suffering. So first of all, how do the afflictions develop? Just to remind ourselves, and again, it should not be. So if you reflect on the Lamrim, if you reflect on this particular topic this coming week, it shouldn't be outside of ourselves. It shouldn't be, oh, this is theoretically, there's this anger over there, there's this attachment over there, it might be my neighbor or someone else. No, we should look at our own mind, recognizing the afflictions. How do afflictions develop? Well, let's look at the afflictions first. And then hopefully come to see how a moment of anger, for instance, was preceded by something else, by an exaggerating mind, a mind that just exaggerates the negativity of its object. This particular mind, called the exaggerating attitude, or the inappropriate attitude, as it's also called, it's a fascinating type of mind that can only arise because of our root misapprehension, because of our mind not being able to perceive phenomena as they really exist. And I stressed that this last time, that this takes place on a more emotional level, not necessarily, I mean, also on a rational level, yes, but it's hard for us to recognize when there's strong emotions involved, because usually strong emotions, they focus on the object that triggered the emotion, and there's no space to actually reflect on, well, how does it perceive its object? Does it accord with reality and so forth? And what else emotions do? Well, on top of that, what they also do is they govern our actions. They're so powerful. So the more powerful the emotions, the more powerful these actions. And afflictive emotion, of course, are those that are powerfully negative. So to be aware, the root cause of that, of course, is the misapprehension, giving rise automatically. So as long as that is there, to give rise to the mind that apprehends the self to exist inherently. I don't remember whether I discussed it in this class here or wherever, I don't know, I talked about this, but it's actually fascinating why, when I have the sense of inherent existence with regard to all phenomena, or not just a sense, but a mind that grasps inherent existence, why does that lead to self-grasping versus grasping at the self of another person first? Why not grasp at my neighbor first? Why not grasp at my laptop first? No, the first mind that it gives rise to is self-cherishing, or self-centeredness, grasping at the self in the sense, I should say, well, so the misapprehension of reality gives rise to self-centeredness and a type of self-attachment. Why not being attached to something else? Well, I guess because the mind that actually holds on to this I, well, it labels I on the basis of the mind itself and a body, presumably a body. It labels, and a moment later, because of that misapprehension, because the closest to that mind is that I that has been labeled by a previous moment of mind. So it's the same continuum, but a previous moment of mental consciousness labeled I on the basis of mind and body. And since that's the closest to that mind, there's self-cherishing, there's self-centeredness. So anything else is a little further away, right? Okay, the body and the mind are close enough, but you label on the basis of those you label I, or we label I. And that, of course, then that self-cherishing then judges anything from the point of view of that being, this attachment, this considering this I to be more important than anyone else's I. I'm considering my own well-being, because the mind naturally wants to be happy. That's just the nature of the mind, to be satisfied and not to experience trouble and so forth. So it considers my own happiness more important, and dependent on then the experiences that I have, which are actually the result of my karma. Well, these experiences now I judge as in like, helps me, doesn't help me, I don't care. So positive, negative, or neutral. And then, of course, positive, it gives rise to attachment, want more of that, or greed, etc. Then anger, on the other hand, if I don't want that. So every time these afflictions arise in our mind, to give it some thought, to take a moment. If you can't do it in that moment because we're busy with the afflictions, well, maybe take a moment in the evening and check, kind of go through the day and think, well, when was I really angry? What was my anger like? How did it feel? How did it arise? Oftentimes we may catch ourselves in the moment, like, oh my God, I've been angry for the last half an hour. And to take maybe then a moment and check, how did I get to this moment? What preceded it? And what was first? And how was somehow the I involved? Because it's impossible for the I not to be involved. When I say the I mean self-centeredness. It's impossible for self-centeredness not somehow to be me, that did this to me, why me, and so forth. This is good for me. This will give me happiness and so forth. So just in the beginning, just to watch it as part of our practice, to get to know it, to recognize it. Pride as in arrogance, feeling I'm just a little bit better than everyone else. Not just more important. I mean, we have that sense anyway, but better. I'm beyond everyone. The sense of haughtiness, if you like, entitlement. I mean, here it's not mentioned, but envy with the modern world being so competitive. Then there's attachment towards something. I want to be, I don't know, successful. I want to be wealthy. I want to be respected. And anger or aversion towards the person who has exactly those qualities or has reached such, so being successful, being, I don't know, wealthy, etc. So I have aversion. I resent this person for having these qualities, and I myself am attached to them. So it's kind of like 2 in 1, attachment and anger. Anyway, so to take some time and recognize them. Recognize these afflictions. That should do. That keeps you busy for 1 week. Okay, focusing on those. All right, great. So this is the week of afflictions. And then, well, it's usually the time of, but to spend a little bit more time on those. Okay, and I go through the other ones later. But I also want to continue with, where are the questions? There. Jim's questions. There are some left. Okay, so these ones I hope I've answered. There's really not much left, but he asks about is this big enough? Yeah, this is good, isn't it? Can you see it properly?
No, please, if you can do it more big.
Okay,
It's not big enough.
Go to 200. How about now?
Can you take it a little bit on all the
On the edges, okay.
Yeah. Oh,
How about now?
Okay, because now you can see all the sentence.
Oh, good, good. Great, good. All right. So actually his question relates to the word before. It relates to the empowering condition. We spoke about it last time. And now he asks about the Tibetan word, which is Wangmo. Wang means power. As I said last time, I'd like to translate it as dominant, actually, as powerful or dominant. Anyway, so here the word Wang, at the end, there's a po, which is usually the suffix is a male suffix. Yeah, he's right. If it's Wang Mo, for instance, like my name is Wang Mo, and indicated by the name is that this is the name of a woman. It's a female kind of name or a name of a woman, Mo. And so his question is, does this have any symbolic meaning? Does the word Wangpo also means powerful male or king? Well, yeah, it does. In certain contexts, it can mean that, but not in the context of the three conditions. So in the context, I don't know, like talking about the great king, Wangpo Chumbo, or like the powerful male. Sure, why does it relate to those? Well, there's just the meaning of these words in certain contexts. Yeah, it makes sense if you take it literally, Wang as in having power or being dominant, and then po the male the male suffix. Yeah, it makes sense. So Christian Steiner's dictionary, this is one online dictionary, he gives that definition. Well, not definition, but meaning as such. I mean, it can mean as part of the empowering condition, etc. It can mean dominant in that context, like the context of the three conditions, and it can also in other contexts mean powerful male, etc. Can it be related to the idea of the male tantric deity inseparably united with its female consort? I don't think. I think that stretches it a little bit. I haven't heard of this, and I don't think so. I mean, it's like in other languages, certain nouns are male or female. And I believe I think it's Spanish and Portuguese, most of these languages, if the word ends with an O, I think it's female. If it's male, and if it ends with an A, it's female. Not in the case of all words, but in the case of some words, it's like that. And in other languages also, I mean, I don't know. In German, the sun is female. I think in French it's male. It's the other way around. And it's just how the language works. And in this case here, yeah, the dominant condition happens to be has that male suffix. So you could probably say it's, well, they don't really talk about it as being male, but in the sense of if you apply the Western ideas that it's male. But I don't think it goes as far as talking about the tantric deities and so forth. The unity of subject and object? No. In what way? And what does unity of subject and object mean anyway? What is the unity of subject and object? I mean, if there's a mind, it has an object, so there's a unity. They come together and they form a unity. But that's no, I don't think it has to do with Wangbo or no, it's yeah, I don't think so. So a unity is just the label we give to two things that arise together. Could this be the symbol of non-dual unity between subject and object? Well, first of all, empowering condition or the empowering or the dominant condition and the observed condition are not, there's no non-dual unity, and it's therefore also not a symbol of them. And again, when I said non-dual, I talked about previously this mind that realizes emptiness directly. And in that case, if the mind is the direct a mind that directly realizes emptiness and the object is emptiness, then in that case, yes, it's non-dual, because to that mind, there's no sense of subject and object. It's like to that mind, the sense of, yeah, being a subject or being something that perceives something else, it just disappears. I mean, right now, when I look around my room, for instance, there's a sense there's this object over there, there's this cupboard over there, and this is the observer. That's the kind of sense I have. And later on, I can recall that my mind perceived this cupboard. And there was this sense of a distance, like me being over here and this object being over there. Although what appears to my mind it's not like this cupboard has entered my mind. No, it's just an appearance of that, right? It's just an appearance, and the appearance is over here with my mind, and the object is over there. But still, I say I saw the cupboard, and there's a sense of distance. Now, with the object of emptiness, there's no sense of, the sense of distance is gone, and that is described as a non-dual. Okay. So in other words, seeing the duality between structure as an object as existing, but as merely conceptual imputations. In other words, seems to imply that what you're saying here in this sentence is basically the same as here, but this is quite different here. So non-dual unity between subject and object, seeing the duality between subject and object as existing, but as merely conceptual. Well, everything is merely conceptually imputed. So everything that exists is merely imputed. And even non-existent things are imputed. I mean, even more so. Something that doesn't exist, our mind just imputes it. I mean, it doesn't exist. But whatever does exist is also merely imputed. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, so I hope I've answered that a little bit. And then the non-dual perception, I've answered that before. What would non-dual perception mean in everyday life? For an ordinary person, no idea, right? Because unless we have direct realization of emptiness, there's no non-dual mind. If someone was able to practice it, well, practicing emptiness, in other words, focusing on emptiness, meditating on it, reflecting on it over and over again, until we come to realize it. Would we then genuinely rejoice in others' success and see the faults of others as our own faults? No. Why would we? I mean, well, once we realize, once we have non-dual perception, we realize emptiness directly. Oh, there's a huge change, of course, in our outlook. We've definitely reached the path of seeing, which means the afflictions are not as strong. Some of them we have already eliminated, the acquired or intellectually acquired. Those are already gone. And it's definitely, there's much more of a genuine rejoicing in others' success, of course. Well, at all times, I mean, maybe subtle jealousy may still be there. I mean, just by realizing emptiness, it doesn't mean that your innate afflictions are totally gone, and they may still have a subtle influence and not as rough and coarse as in our case, but they're still there. And you see the faults of others as our own faults. Well, that's a wrong consciousness. I mean, the Buddha would not see our faults as his own faults, right? I mean, that would be because another person's fault. I mean, there can be, of course, projections. When I perceive another person, if I'm, for instance, very stingy, then I'm not just saying if I am, but I mean, being stingy and I project on another person, oh, they're really stingy, they must be stingy. Like usually we do that. Usually like our own faults are easily projected on other people. It's very hard for us. We project them on the lamas, we project them on the Buddhas. In that case, yes, it's just a projection of my own fault. But it's not always true that the faults we see in another person are not actually there. I mean, they're adventitious. They're not in the nature of that person, but still conventionally false. What is wholeness? Be one person who possibly has non-dual perception? Well, according to what is wholeness said, these last teachings, no, because he said he hopes to reach the path of preparation. Of course, we can't take that literally. I'm just saying, from what his wholeness says, no, he hasn't. I don't believe him, of course. I mean, well, I can't say not many people believe him, but a lot of people would not believe him. So I think, leave aside what his wholeness says. I mean, no, I'm pretty sure his wholeness has non-dual perception. His wholeness has definitely realized emptiness directly. But are all of his minds non-dual? Well, I said even the Buddha's mind. So let's say his wholeness is a Buddha, which is totally possible. Does his wholeness have non-dual perceptions? Yes. Does he have dual perceptions? Yes. Because from the point of view of seeing conventional truth, again, that would be considered dual. But there's nothing wrong with that kind of dual perception. It's not a problem. Does he ever talk about this? Well, no, not in that. I mean, he says, I'm hoping to some days or some weeks ago, I think Sona said he's hoping to attain. I listened to it. It was during the Sakadawa. I think it was during Sakadawa. So I listened to it again, and I remember Sona saying, "I'm hopeful to reach the path, to reach the truth of cessation in this life." Well, that means the color. Now switching to Tibetan. Path of seeing. Because you only reach a truth of cessation once, a certain truth of cessation. I mean, it doesn't have to mean total cessation of everything, but certain cessations of afflictions once you reach the path of seeing. So that could imply he's hoping to do it in this life. He's actually on the path of preparation, but his teaching, he gives a different, he makes different statements for our own benefit. So if in the audience that's most beneficial, well, that's what he teaches. But I personally believe he has definitely non-dual perception. And he talks about this, no, but it's kind of indicated by his qualities, etc. So if yes, what does he say about it? So no, he doesn't really, I haven't heard him say that. But of course, it doesn't mean he hasn't said it. I don't know. To someone during a private conversation or during a teachings that I wasn't there, I missed, or I didn't attend. I may have said that, may have said it. Anyway, so I hope I answered all your questions with this, so I can now close it. And then I wanted to read something that I really liked. How Seti, he wrote this really nice analogy. Is this big enough? Let me just make it a little larger.
Bigger a little bit.
Bigger?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, sure. All right. Now I can't see all of it. Okay. I'll need to put you to the side. Yep, now you've gone to the side. Okay, your pictures. In your teachings, you mentioned the seed and the sprout again. Yep, I've mentioned those two a lot. I don't know, but there's a similar picture or similar analogy, I guess, or a similar example of the mango tree. The mango tree only bears fruit in a certain time of the year. The fruit is sweet when one eats it. But where does the sweetness come from? Is it in the leaves of the tree? Is it in the bark of the tree? Is it in the roots of the tree? Right? We may have a sense, oh, like when you make a cake, oh, where does that buttery taste come from? Oh, from the butter, right? Or where's the moisture come from oil or water, etc. We may have this sense, but really in the end, even in a cake, it's a unique taste. And it's like, it's not exactly, you don't find that exactly in the butter, etc. And here it's even harder in the leaves. It's like bite into the leaves, no sweetness. The bark, roots, no. So no, there's no sweetness in anything but the fruit at a certain time. So when there's no fruit, there's no sweetness anywhere to be found. This goes even further. The sweetness is only there when one has receptor for this to taste it. Yeah, so important. If you don't have any receptors in your mouth to taste sweetness, then who's to say it's sweet? If to you it tastes bitter, what is it? Sweet or bitter or whatever. So yeah, very interesting. So he takes it, of course, first of all, from the point of view of the causes and conditions. Where's the sweetness exactly come from? And then also from the point of view of perception. So the sweetness itself is not the fruit. No, it's just a characteristic that we may perceive. But a mosquito, for instance, when it tries to eat or suck on the mango, it may not experience it as sweet at all. So the sweetness can be exchanged with something, with everything, or with at least what we call a self. The self, again, it can't be found in a similar way. It's just different perceptions, different minds perceiving it, having been labeled, of course, but also a certain experience on the basis of which we do label. But we can search for it in different ways and we'll never find it because in the end, it just has been labeled, just as the sweetness itself. In the Western tradition, there's this, the sum is more than its parts, which leads to emergence. Wiki is helpful here. Yeah, so I followed his advice and I actually went to Wikipedia before we started class. And in philosophy, he says, emergence occurs when a complex entity has properties or behaviors that its parts do not have on their own and emerge only when they interact in the wider whole. Where's the emergence gone? But I think there's missing something crucial. I don't know. I like that emergence. It makes total sense to me. Conventionally seen, yes. When you have like a chariot, for instance, well, it's able to carry people. It's able to roll from one place to another. So all these properties are not found in the individual parts. I mean, well, some parts possibly, like the wheels, for instance, but the part that's kind of flat where people stand on, I mean, you know, like if you have like a flat piece of wood, for instance, let's assume the chariot is made of wood, you know, these planks on which people stand and that are attached to the wheels. I mean, these planks themselves, they don't have the property to move. So therefore, there are qualities that you only find in the object itself. It's got to do with the basis of designation that is able to perform a function. The function that actually takes me back to a whole discussion of actions. In this context, the texts speak of actions, but they're really functions that are performed. They're activities that an object can perform, right? And these take place on a conventional level on the basis of certain parts, with none of the parts having those. I mean, even when we talk about the eye can do things because it's labeled on the basis of body and mind. And in combination, it can do things that the mind on its own couldn't do and the body couldn't do on its own, as an example. Okay. Anyway, maybe there's something missing, something crucial. I think labeling, you could say, yes, just emergence, of course, is not enough. But this emergence pretty much makes sense. I hope I understood it right, though. I thought the mango all the time you refer to the seed and sprout because the principle of the sweetness can be applied here too. Yeah, certain qualities of the sprout, of course, they can be applied. Yeah, can be applied here too. At least I think this can be done. Nagarjuna is now emphasizing more the timing aspect. All right, in this case, we speak a lot about the time, so that in one moment there's a seed, and the next moment there's a sprout. He doesn't emphasize this in this context that much. I'm kind of, well, it's indicated, but I've stressed it a lot more. I mean, he talks much more about the arising and the condition in this context. But anyway, but the exact moment where this happens cannot be found anywhere. Yeah. So we declare by our point of view that it's a seed or a sprout, but actually there's no difference at all besides the naming. Well, when it comes down to it, there's no difference in that. It cannot be found. There's no seedness or sproutness from the side of the object. There's just the mind labeling. We've agreed. I mean, language has evolved in a group of people. I mean, we have to communicate. If you were just on your own, you didn't need language. But just let's take the example of applying a term, which is part of language. The naming can, of course, also apply to I mean, we don't necessarily have to apply terms without using a term. There's still some kind of symbolism that enables us, maybe a visual image or whatever, that enables us to think about an object. And that is then, in that case, called the label, although it's not a word as such. But let's take the verbal labeling in this case. So we've decided to call this a sprout versus a label. A sprout versus a seed. Maybe in some other cultures they don't even draw a distinction. This is a seed for all. These are all seeds. They're just a seed with a little thing at the side and the seed without the little thing at the side, right? And again, it's totally. Yeah, there's nothing from the side of the object that was going, I'm a seed, by the way. If you haven't seen it yet, if you haven't recognized it yet, I'm a seed, and that next to me is the sprout. No, it's not happening. It's totally up to the mind. Okay. Therefore, What do you say? But actually, there's no difference at all besides the naming. Yeah, I know this is a harsh jump to conclusion. This is counterintuitive. Oh, yeah, because intuitively it seems the seed is telling me I'm a seed, I'm a sprout. But of course, yeah, for us, it's the exact opposite because we all have one perspective, which clearly shows the one or the other. Yeah, it seems so clear. This is this and this is that, and we never doubt it. But in analyzing, there can none be found. Actually, I still use Tondokiri here every day to search up this conundrum. So this perspective is just dissolving in some way. This I'm not sure I understand. Can none be found? Oh, in terms of finding the seed in that. Yes, so true. Sadly, I cannot be over specific at this, and I know there's some wrong thoughts here too. Anyway, no, but I really like this. I like how he takes it from the seed and the sprout, and he brings it to a mango. I mean, it's mango season, well, here in India at least. I don't know where you are, whether it is or not. But yeah, there's sweet mangoes, and to think it seems in and of itself this, that, and the other, and to apply this now to every situation, if we can. All right. Anyway, so I wanted to share that with you. And now it's time to continue with the text. All right. Okay, I'll enlarge it a little bit. Oh, this is no part. Okay. So, of course, I spoke about rising and so forth. Well, these are all functions. Okay, so maybe it's helpful to use the term functions. So things perform functions. And even though some of these concepts, producing something is not something as, it's not a way we would talk about, well, maybe we would, but in general, it's a little weird to us, but we use all the time. The I don't know, the chariot just took off, it just rolled down the street. I used that example last time. So without anyone rolling it, well, yeah, the gravity is basically responsible for it. And there are many other examples. And usually there's this duality, if you like, and here duality, I use the word not in the Buddhist context, but in the sense that you always have two aspects. And this is not something negative. I remember Jadu Rinpoche, he sometimes stresses this. I've heard him stress this. Like, for instance, when we have an experience, someone says something to us, someone harms us in one way or another, like insults us. At that time, we have a thought, oh, it's them. They caused me this problem. They have this is what they did to me. And we don't realize there's another aspect. There's what came from my side. So something came from my side and something came from the other side. So I think Rinpoche's example was like if you get stabbed with a knife, for instance, oh, they stabbed me. And there's a sense there's just one aspect. But if we hadn't accumulated the karma to be stabbed, then this other person could have never stabbed us. So I'm not saying we're a bad person because we have that karma. No, let's think of karma also from the point of view of cause and effect, in the sense that there's not like a solid thing that's called karma and we're caught in that, and my karma just happens to be the one to get stabbed. That is a total misunderstanding of karma. Each moment certain karmic causes come into fruition, arise, they ripen, and new ones are accumulated. And when I accumulate new karmic causes, they leave something behind. They change my mind because they're volitional action. I'm not talking about reflexes, but volitional actions, and they're always controlled by the mind. And when we say imprints are left, that's just the label for saying our mind has changed in such a way due to this action that it will later on have the experience that conforms with this action, right? And that's just talking about this particular karma, leaving some residue on the mind, leaving something behind in the mind, and leading to an experience later on. And this is not in any way unchanging. It's like, oh, you have these imprints and they're stuck in your mind and they're really concrete and they're there all the time and they never change. No, they're actually constantly changing moment by moment. They're in a constant flux. Our mind is constantly changing. So it's not that if I, for instance, step someone, I don't know, 3 lifetimes ago, well, if then I accumulate a lot of virtue, and for whatever reason that then may affect the residue of stabbing that person, which then in turn leads to this karma of stabbing this person being lessened, being weakened because of some virtue. I may have purified it without even knowing. Now, don't misunderstand. Don't think that purification practice, as it's described in Buddhism with the 4 powers, that this is the only way to purify negative karma. No, this is the most powerful way, the most focused way to purify karma. But there are other ways as well. In fact, we keep all the time negative karmas are weakened or possibly completely purified. Positive ones are destroyed by anger and so forth. So in that way, our actions, one gives rise to the next and the next and the next. So if you get a sense of like arising, ceasing, arising, abiding, ceasing, arising, abiding, ceasing from the point of view of karma, then it makes much more sense that our experiences are different from moment to moment. They change all the time. And of course, I mentioned that last time, the importance of knowing that every moment counts, really. Okay, but anyway, having said all that, if it seems that these actions that are performed, so when we say there's a cause, so you always have 2 aspects, as I said, with regard to karma, for instance, but you can also take cause and effect. A cause always has an object. It always creates something. So the function that it performs as a cause, we label producing. But then it produces something. So the something is the sprout. So for it to be the result, it also performs a function, and that is the arising. So at the same time as the seed produces something, at that time, the sprout arises. The thing is only that there is no sprout in that moment, because being arising is merely labeled on the fact that the cause is there and it's changing, and at some point that which it gives rise to, we label it sprout, and therefore we say it has arisen. But the thing is, it's almost like what Nagarjuna does here is explains this complicated process of producing and arising and, introducing these ideas to us. And once we understood them, he's telling us, well, they're not really there. It's kind of like, what's the whole point of it? But of course, it's all important to understand the conventional principle of cause and effect. Very important. So I hope I've conveyed that to some degree. This picture I added later on for the verse that's going to come next week. So if you don't want to continue with the seed and the sprout, we can take this image. So instead of here having the pot with the seed, you have here and here the pot with the sprout. Well, you have the 3 conditions: the mental consciousness, the uncommon dominant condition, which is this is the mental consciousness, the immediately preceding condition, then the sense faculty, and the object, the observed object. Now, these 2 interact, as it says in Tibetan also. They say yuan tetopgi, which means the object and the sense faculty, they meet, which is just another word of saying they interact. Okay, and because of this was here, there was a perception there that enables this mind to perceive an object in the first place, because that a function of the mind is passed on by this mind here. Then the function of this mind, of the eye consciousness perceiving the tree, the function of it perceiving a visual object, that has been what's the word, that was given basically by the sense faculty. Now I just drew eyes. No, I didn't draw them. I changed them a little bit. I added the eyebrows. I found them online without the eyebrows or with weird eyebrows, so I added the eyebrows. But other than that, I got them online. But the point is that this includes the whole eye faculty, and this enables the sense faculty, or the eye sense faculty. It's responsible for perceiving shape and color, and of course perceiving a particular shape and color, the shape and color of the tree. Well, that comes from the tree itself. So again, cause and effect. Okay, it produces those three, give rise to this. All right. Anyway, but let's go back to what we spoke about last time. I only added it to something we did before, and as I said, it'll come up again. But so previously we spoke about if the arising existed inherently. Of course, you need to have the sprout. Okay, that's pretty clear now. Now I want to talk about the fact that if something arises inherently the way it appears to us, then there's also a sense that the cause and the effect are inherently different. I mean, let's face it, there's a sense to our mind. The seed is over there, the sprout is over. The seed is over here and the sprout is over there. Like, they're totally different things. There is a sense, and we need to get in touch with that. Not with the mind that puts on the hat of like Prasangika, but no, just in everyday life, when you're relaxed, when you're not thinking of emptiness or anything, totally, it seems like it's concrete and totally separate, and somehow seed jump to sprout and be intrinsically different. But what does it mean to be different? What does it even mean? It's not clear to all of you, I'm pretty sure. What does it mean to be different? To be different in the Buddhist context means something very specific. Well, first of all, the easiest way, and we would all agree on this, Gila and I are different people, right? Okay, so from a Buddhist point of view, that's totally right. Different people, definitely. So definitely different. Seed and sprout, also different. Pretty obvious, because they're different, not inherently, but different, conventionally different. Because they exist at different times. Okay. But then, what about two things? No, one thing that has different names. Can you think of something that have different terms to relate to it? Can you think of something? I mean, in different languages, yes.
In
Of course.
Hebrew for the moon, we have some words that it's the same.
Ah, okay. In Tibetan, you have that as well. In Tibetan, you have the word rabbit possessor. Rabbit possessor. You know, I don't know whether you've the man in the moon. Yeah, in the West we talk about the man in the moon, but in the scriptures, where actually if you look at a moon, it looks like there's a rabbit in the moon, right? So you just Google it. I'm not going to show you the rabbit in the moon. Just Google it. Tibetan rabbit in the moon, and then there are outlines drawn around it, and yeah, it looks like a rabbit. So there are two words. And they both mean moon. Rabbit possessor, and then there's dawa, which means moon. Okay, so that's an example. Or, for instance, impermanent and cause. They're, what's the word? Synonyms, they're synonymous. But they're different. They're not the same. They're not the same. We talk in everyday life, we would say, oh, they're the same. They have the same meaning, but they're not the same. They're different. So what does different mean in Buddhism? In Buddhism, different means if two things appear differently to a conceptual consciousness. I'm not talking about a sense consciousness. To a sense consciousness, we don't use language. An eye consciousness doesn't use language to perceive, I don't know, moon or rabbit possessor. It doesn't use language. No, it just perceives the object itself. So it doesn't matter what it's called. So whether one person calls it rabbit possessor or another person calls it moon, it doesn't matter. It's the object itself. So to that mind, that different is not obvious. So it's not from the perspective of the sense consciousness. No, it's from the perspective of a conceptual mind. And yeah, when I talk about rabbit possessor, think of a rabbit possessor, it appears differently to your mind when you think about it. So it's from the point of view of the conceptual consciousness. How do things appear? Different. So the only thing that was not different is moon, right? Moon in terms of the meaning, it's moon, like the meaning is the same, moon. And the word is the same. So when they say moon, like if I ask you, think about moon, right? Of course, it gets a little complicated if you have the same term used for different objects. Jumper, right? Jumper means like a sweatshirt. In some countries, they use, instead of sweatshirt, they may say jumper. And a person who's about to jump from a building to commit suicide is also called a jumper, right? Or if they've jumped already, they talk about it. But of course, that's in a different context, and it needs to be implied what is meant, right? Think of the jumper on the standing on the roof, then I know it's the person, versus I'm wearing a jumper. But I hope the idea becomes clear. So what is different? Different is the Buddhist principle of difference is this. For those of you who don't know, many of you have studied philosophy enough, so you're aware of the difference. Well, you're aware of what different means. Okay. Which is slightly different to being the same nature, things being inseparably linked. For instance, myself and my mind. I'm not my mind. And there, my mind and myself, the I, both are merely labeled conventionally existent, not ultimately existent, but they're different. Okay. But they're not ultimately different. They're not inherently different. They're merely labeled. Okay, so let's now go through this. In the context of the second refutation, the word in, mentioned in the second line, remember? Okay, let's go back to the root text. Okay.
Yeshima, can I ask you the definition of difference that you were just explaining?
Right, right. Yes,
so
yes.
If two things appear differently to a conceptual consciousness, and we were using the example of the moon.
Yes.
So I don't know, it seems just more like if you said rabbit possessor and I knew that meant the moon, or I said the moon, it would still appear as a moon. Like, I don't see how they would appear differently when you know what two different terms refer to.
Okay. Well, when you know what they refer to, but there's a connotation that comes along with them, right? I mean, when I say rabbit possessor, think of the rabbit possessor. I mean, me just saying that, okay, if I just say that, it doesn't mean you necessarily do it. But when you take both to mind, when you think rabbit possessor, I mean, you're already using a different term. I mean, to your mind appears rabbit possessor, like you think in a certain language, right? So right now, because that's easiest, I can only communicate via language. So let's just use the symbolism of language that we use. So when you think with it in a particular language. So whether you think, oh, there's a rabbit possessor on the sky, or there's a moon on the sky, it appears differently to your mind, doesn't it? Would you agree? I'm just saying, wait, I'm just trying to find you. I want to look at you.
Rabbit possessor. Yeah, I mean, if you say rabbit possessor, yes, it doesn't like it. It seems that it comes with more bells and whistles than just the moon.
Right. Oh, there you go. Okay.
You know?
It's subtle, right? If you just have the mood appear to your conceptual consciousness, that's different. That's different. But when you actually use language, right? You think with terminology. I mean, we think in the language that we're most familiar with, and then whether you use this term or another term, it appears to you differently. And it is said, I think I've read this somewhere, that when, for instance, the sun in English is just the but as I said, in German it's female, and in French it's male. And this is how children, for instance, seem to look at objects. Like if you ask them, because it's been male or female for all their life, is it a male or female? They right away go, oh, female. Like the sun is female in the case of a German, but it's male in the case of and it doesn't have any deep meaning. I mean, right? I mean, anyway, who's right and who's wrong, the French or the Germans, so it doesn't make sense, but it's the language that conveys something. The language has a certain meaning, which is why, and it changes all the time. This is why nowadays we have to be politically so correct, because certain words hold a certain meaning that actually it refers to the same object. For instance, I've noticed that the word for a person who's mentally challenged, it keeps changing. If you look at some of the older texts, like they were insane, right? It's a terrible word. I mean, nowadays it's like, ooh, right? But in those days, it was totally neutral. First, they were mad, maybe crazy, then mad, then insane, then mentally challenged, and possibly that's become really bad. Now it's mentally impaired. So you see, it's like it carries with it something.
I see. Yeah. Okay,
Does
I
that
get
make
it
sense?
now. Yeah,
Okay.
and as you were talking, I was also thinking about like water and H2O. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and for
Mm-hmm.
me, like, that makes it very clear. Somehow I couldn't get my head around the rabbit moon, the rabbit possessor and the moon.
Can you
But
see
the
the
other
rabbit?
examples, but the other examples helped a lot. I see what you mean now.
Okay.
Thank
And
you.
yes, sometimes it may be coarser and subtler, but it's not saying that to every mind. But actually, to every mind, there is that difference. Yeah, actually, there should be. But whether we're aware or not, that's a different matter. Yeah. Okay. But I'm glad you asked. It's good. It's always good if you ask. Great. So anyway, let's go back to that root verse. This one here. So the nature of a thing does not exist in its conditions, and that's the reason for why the thing itself does not exist inherently, and something inherently different arising from which that thing has arisen does not exist either. So that's what this is saying. Here it's saying that, well, inherently those two are not different. So in the context of the second refutation, the word in mentioned in the second line of the third verse indicates a temporal locative. So it doesn't need to be say in, kind of arising in from the causes and conditions, because the rising is closely connected. Well, because producing is part of the condition, that's the function it performs, and then therefore it's closely connected to the arising, which is why if arising existed inherently, you would find it in the condition. Now this here is different. Being different, you could see it just from the point of view, like in terms of time. It's not like it's in the condition. Then if the condition here refers to the seed, for instance. So the being different is in the seed, if it is not in the sprout. No, it's really difficult to say it's in one of the two, because you need both, right? So if it existed inherently, it wouldn't be in either of those, but it would have to exist at the same time. So in the context of the second refutation, the word in, the locative in the Sanskrit and the Tibetan, it indicates a temporal locative. Nagarjuna argues that if a cause and its result were inherently different, a result such as the sprout would exist at the time of its causes and conditions, because for a cause and its result to be inherently different, they would have to exist simultaneously. They give the example, I didn't mention this here, but you have two people, you have Maitri, and you have Gupta. Those are the Sanskrit names. So you have Boas and Leora. Okay. So Boas and Leora, because we look at the two and say, oh, Boas is different to Leora, right? I mean, let's say they're twins, or Leora and Yael, two girls, two women. So Leora and Yael. So we're looking at them, and they may be identical twins, but we decide, oh, they're different. So usually we take both to mind, and there's a sense, well, they exist at the same time. We look at them and we decide they're different. But for two things to be different, they don't have to exist at the same time, of course. But if they existed inherently, so then how can you say if they were inherently different, you put both at that moment when they're different, they would have to be both there, because I'm not different. You cannot say I'm different. I mean, to be different without having something there to be different from, it's like saying I'm long, I'm big, without there being something that I'm bigger than. Right? I mean, think, can there be big without short? Sorry, can there be long without short? Is there long without short? If you think about it, no. There's like I take an object. I don't have a pen right here. This notebook. Oh, I'm gone. I can't see myself anymore. I don't know whether you can see me. Where am I? Oh, there I am. Okay. Yeah. So is this long? To say this is long, it's ridiculous. It's only in relation to something else. In and of itself, it's not long. But if that was inherently long, it couldn't be small in relation to something else. It couldn't. Does that make sense? It would just be long, nothing else. Because it doesn't need anything to be long. This is a really good example, long and short. If you think of a pen, is it long or short? If it were inherently existent, if longness were inherent, it would always be long. Even if something longer were next to it, it would still be long. It would not be short. It couldn't be short. So likewise here, for something to exist as inherently different from something else. I forgot to switch off my phone. Sorry. Sorry, I just need to put down the volume of my phone. If something were inherently different, so if A were inherently different from B, then in that moment, when there's A and when A is different from B, you better have B. Because without B, how could it be different? Like different from what? Okay, so therefore, for a cause and its result to be inherently different, they would have to exist simultaneously. Otherwise, there would be no time when they existed as different phenomena. At the time of the cause, its result has not yet arisen, and at the time of the result, its cause has ceased to exist. So it doesn't make sense. If they have ceased to exist, they don't exist at the same time. So how can one be different from the other? If it's inherently different, there's nothing to be different from it. Furthermore, there would be no point of reference. So it's first of all in terms of time. There's no time when they're different. So if you say they're different, there must be a time when they're actually different. I mean, if it's inherently so, you better have a time when you can say they're different. They're both there, they're different. Doesn't work, doesn't happen. Furthermore, there would be no point of reference, and this is what I said earlier, because when the cause exists, there's no result from which to differ, and when the result exists, there's no cause from which to be different. So a cause and its result being different would be like the existence of something long without the existence of something short. Okay, so this is just as like a summary, if you like. So if a cause and its result were inherently different, it would absurdly follow that the sprout existed at the time of its cause, the seed. Because if you say the seed at that time is different from the sprout, well, you need to have a sprout at that time. Otherwise, there's no way to say they're different. However, if a result were to exist at the time of its cause, if the sprout existed at the time of the seed, the cause would have no influence on its result. Had no influence on its result. Well, now you may wonder, Leora may have an influence on me. Leora may say something. Dalit may say something, and that has an influence on me. So we exist at the same time. Oh, but here we need to go on a subtler level. We need to understand the Leora who has an influence on me is not the Leora who exists simultaneously with me, in the sense that if Leora has an impact on what she said has an impact on me now. If Dalit says something, for instance, I don't know, she gives this really good explanation on something and it changes my life. The Dalit who said something really profound is well, let's say right now she says something. She's the Dalit who is the cause for me a moment later to become a different person. But you see, there's a difference. It's a moment earlier. It's not like she says it and I'm in that moment. I first need some time to listen, to hear what she says, to give it a moment for it to sink in, and then I'm different. Okay, so she says something, my life changes. But the person who said it, it's not the person who has the impact on me, who's just changed my life, is not, it doesn't exist at the same time in that has existed a moment before it changed my life. So a moment earlier. So when we say we affect each other, it's like an earlier moment of me. So let's say the lead says something to me at 1:30, on 1:30 this afternoon. I listen to what you said. I take a minute, and boom, at 1:31, boy, I'm different. So it was the lead at 1:30 who's the cause of me at 1:31. And then I respond. And maybe I say something that changes her life. So then there's the lead at 1:32 who is like, has changed by what I said. Right? And usually it works like that. I say something, the other person listens. Then the other person says something, I listen. So we affect each other. But when we say we affect each other, when we go on a subtler level, it's very tiny moments, moments in time. So an earlier moment, she says something, I listen, something happens to me. I say something and something happens to her. And in that way, of course, we influence each other. But if we were to exist at the same time, Dalit at 1:30 has no influence on me. Okay, at 1:30. Dalit at 1:30 has no influence on me at 1:30 because she cannot be my cause. To influence me, she has to be my cause. Does that make sense? Something to think about, right? However, a result were to exist. So here, influence on the result. I mean, when I say influence on means like the changes of that object, changes in, or the actions of those objects have an impact on me. That's what influence means in this context. So if a result were to exist at the time of its cause, the cause would have no influence on its result. The result would already be there. So what influence would it have? So the result would be without a cause and therefore couldn't exist. The reasoning is a little different to before. As before, it's important to note that these logical absurdities would only apply if a cause and its effect were inherently different. According to the Prasangika school, the difference between a cause and its result doesn't exist objectively and by way of its own character. It is merely labeled independence on, for instance, the fact that they appear differently to a conceptual consciousness that thinks about them, even if they don't exist at the same time. So you see, we're not dependent on that. Phenomena being merely labeled, there's a lot more freedom. If they were inherently different, besides the fact that it really would be impossible. I mean, if you go hypothetically, it would be absurd. It would be absurd. When we actually apply this logic, this absurdities, these hypothetical consequences, we're having actually a mixture. It kind of exists conventionally and ultimately, because if we were just taking into consideration inherent ultimate existence, inherent existence, nothing would be possible. I mean, you wouldn't have a seed that is the cause of a sprout. But here we're trying to work within the frame of that which is possible, cause and effect, etc., and then bring in this absurdity of phenomena existing inherently. And yeah, like they would have to exist at the same time. But if things are just labeled, anything is possible means, of course, not anything is possible. So things, I mean, it's not like possible that I'm a Buddha right now just because I label myself a Buddha. Of course, that's not what is meant. But phenomena can exist at different times, and still we can label they're different because they appear differently to the mind, right? But if it's not dependent on labeling the way just described, if they're truly different from something, then that something better be there, because a moment later it doesn't help. That would actually, the seed and the sprout, if they were inherently different, they were all like one entity, because something that is inherently existent cannot depend on something other than itself, right? So if the seed were inherently different from the sprout, it would depend on the sprout to be different from it. And since it cannot be different from something other than itself, it will be the same as the seed. So it goes even into those directions as well. I mean, we can take that also into consideration, or we can also reflect on this. Oh, this is already the next part. Okay. never mind. So with these two refutations of the rising from something different, Arjuna indicates that the quote from a sutra cited in verse 2 teaches that there are four conventionally existent conditions. It doesn't imply that these conditions exist inherently. Therefore, the sutras that teach that things arise from causes, such as the four kinds of conditions, do not present things as arising from something different. All right, so this takes us back to verse number 2, saying that just because the Buddha said there are causes and conditions, he didn't imply that these exist inherently. No, conventionally, it's all true. It's okay. It works. But of course, inherently, it'd be totally absurd. Okay. Great. So I hope this verse kind of makes sense to some degree. Trust me, what comes next is not much easier. It's difficult. But I said to you, the good thing at the beginning, it's really hard, but it gets a little easier as we continue. Okay? Hopefully. Anyway, let's see. But it's good to stretch our mind, use our mind in that way. At the very least, we keep our gray matter active. Yeah. But what I would like you to do, to also read in advance. Okay, now you don't have anything to read in advance because I've really struggled with this material and with the teaching by His Holiness. I was a little busy. I couldn't give it more time. But I'll work on it. I'll continue tomorrow to work on it. So hopefully you get something soon. And then please read it in advance and give it some thought. And if you read it once, you understand that much better. If you read it twice, even better. So our classes were always like that. We would always read in advance. So it's good to do that. But of course, right now you don't have anything. But let's then do some meditation. I hope I've talked quite quickly again. Gila, let me know whether that's true. No, it's not too bad. Okay, I get carried away, but I wanted to finish that part. Okay. Anyway, please, if there was anything that wasn't clear yet, I mean, I'm actually tempted to also have a class when you just ask questions. You could let me know if that's what you like to do, or just write to Dalit and say, just talk about this once again. Just say this once again, right? So I'm very grateful to any questions. It gives me a sense of how much you understand, which parts I need to focus on more. I'd really appreciate that. Of course, if there aren't any, that's fine. But if you want me to talk about something more, emphasize one thing over another, please let me know. Great. But now it's time to meditate. All right. So as we usually do, well, we'll do some mindfulness meditation. Let go of any disruptive thoughts, any mental exhaustion, whatever was there a moment ago, let it go. And just focus on the breath. So take a moment to think of a situation. A situation today that is the cause of a situation tomorrow. For instance, preparing a meal, cooking the meal today, which tomorrow leads to the ready to eat meal. So all the causes, think of the causes needed today, such as yourself as the cook, the ingredients, the tools, the stove, so all these are responsible for creating the meal. So taking or focusing on the cook, the cook is producing the meal. The cook performs the function of preparing and thus producing the meal. What does the meal do? Well, it's coming into existence. Which is just another term for saying it is arising. So today, the meal is coming into existence. How does coming into existence or arising? How does that appear to your mind? As something concrete? Existing from its own side? If the coming into existence of that meal were to exist the way it appears to us, then the meal would be ready today. The meal would exist in its cause, in the cook. For the cook is responsible for the coming of existence of the meal. And you can't have the arising or the coming into existence of a meal that exists inherently yet when it exists, there's no meal. In other words, while you're preparing the meal, if there were an inherent coming into existence of the meal, the meal would be ready. It would exist right now. So you wouldn't have to prepare it. It would be pointless to cook it. But of course, that fault only arises if the arising or the coming into existence of that meal existed the way it appears to our mind. If it exists conventionally, there's no fault, no contradiction. We merely label on the basis of the activities today and independence on what is the result tomorrow. We label today the meal comes into existence. Also, if I were to ask, are the raw ingredients in your kitchen as the cost of the meal tomorrow different from the meal? Our answer would be, of course. The raw ingredients are different from the meal tomorrow. But how does being different appear to our mind? As an inherent quality, as an inherent characteristic. That phenomena have. But if it existed in that way, if the raw ingredients and tomorrow's meal were inherently different, then the meal would have to exist today. Or both would exist tomorrow. Taking today as the example, so the raw ingredients were inherently different from the meal tomorrow. Tomorrow's meal would exist right now. Because otherwise, the ingredients would have nothing to be different from. Which would be like having long without something that is short, or something short without there being anything that is long. And so now to conclude this short analysis, any kind of conclusion, any kind of insight you've gained, spend a moment just focusing on that. Any feeling that has arisen in the form of an insight, single pointedly focus on it. To deepen your insight. finally, let's, of course, dedicate our virtue, this incredibly positive potential for us, taking the time to reflect on the ultimate nature of all phenomena. May this virtue become a cause for our enlightenment, for our full enlightenment as a Buddha, so that we are of the greatest benefit, not just to ourselves, but also to all sentient beings. So a cause for our own resultant refuge. But for that, of course, we need cause of refuge in the form of our great masters, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So let's therefore dedicate our virtue also towards a long and a healthy life of our realized great masters. But also, we need sentient beings to become fully enlightened. So not only in the future, but even right now, may our positive potential have an impact of those around us, those who are sick, like Geshe and Tali Lubin. May it help them to recuperate. But of course, may it also bring more wisdom, more understanding, more compassion towards those beings in the world who live and act in contradiction to democracy, the rule of law, and so forth. And so with this in mind, let's recite the prayers together. Through these merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chinrezig Denzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Krishna.
So have a great week. Please remember the Lamrim and of course what we're studying as well. Try to bring it into your daily life, into your stressful life, into your problems, etc., and see whether you can make it part of, well, your daily life. And then, yes? Oh, Bada, there you are with Tara. You just emanated from Tara.
Really not. I'm looking at Tara just to get something good in my mind. But what I was just thinking about how I can take everything we've learned today, and we know we've learned before, but you accentuated it today, to the causes and effects of what's happening now around us.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a very, very, very big task.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very, very difficult to decipher it all.
Of course. Yes.
And
yes,
not
that's true.
take it as inherent.
Yes. Good. Very good. Yes. Great. Okay. Anyway, thank you. Thank you. And
so
see you
much.
next week, everyone. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Geshe-ma. Thank you,
Thank
Dali.
you
very much.
Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Oops.
You're okay?